Here I have all of my mounting hardware, along with a couple other things, like my serpentine belt, the tensioner. This is the baggie that I got with this coilover setup that has all of the new important stretch to yield, yada yada bolts that you need, including some mounts, a couple other things, and the 2 front, 2 rear setup, some coolant, my control arms and lower ball joints are over there, brake lines, and then tie rods. Also, another thing with coilovers, if you buy it in a kit, they probably will send you with a set of coilover wrenches. Now, these aren't your normal wrenches, as you can tell. These coilover wrenches are necessary to tighten or adjust your suspension. Really useful tool to have, and keep a hold of these. This is everything that I have laid out. That will go more into detail as I start putting these on the car. There really isn't anything left to do except set up the quick jack and get her lifted up. Alrighty, so I'm up underneath the car. I have the wheels off, and I'm gonna start on removing the strut. This is the front strut, and I'm just gonna be pulling off these brake pad sensors and cutting the zip tie that's holding it down, and then I'm just gonna have to remove this bolt right back here, along with the one up top. I'll have to open the hood to get to that one. But it's just remove that one and then the one up top, and then you want to spread the spindle. That way you can, or just hammer it down, that way you can free it up. One thing I do recommend using when you're doing suspension components, or really anything that that's stuck on or rusted out or what have you, it's PB Blaster. Some of my favorite stuff. I use this on a lot of stuff, along with the breaker bar, which is this tool right here. That's my first favorite tool in the shop. This is my second favorite tool in the shop. Between the two of them, I can get anything freed up. But you have to be careful with the breaker bar, because there is a reason why it's nicknamed a breaker bar, because it can break stuff too. But it's also really good at breaking things loose. But other than that, this is good to come out. So I've got my brake pad level sensor unplugged and my wheel speed sensor removed. I have that removed out of the way, and now I can go ahead and tackle this bolt and nut. Another good item to have in the shop is a bottle jack, or if you're on jack stands, you can just remove your jack and use it this way, but it's good to support the underside to actually lift this spindle. It makes pulling the bolt out easier, and it also makes it helps pushing it back up into the shock, so you can mount it properly without having to, you know, manhandle it and have 2 people. Just makes it a lot easier. But I'm going to use this to lift up the jack so I can get that bolt out easier, and then drop it down, and then go after this and get this out by removing the top shock bolt. Another really useful tool is this here. It's actually really cheap. I got it from ECS also, with my last coilover kit that I'd gotten from my previous car. This is a strut base spreader. So back in the back, there's kind of a, where it wraps around, there's a small gap, so it can close around the shock and hold it. This tool is designed to fit into that gap, and then you see how it's kind of ovular. It's designed to twist and force it open. This is really useful. It just helps break it loose for the most part, and then it just takes some light hits to get it out. But I'm going to go ahead and use this tool to crack it open and then hammer it out, and from there we can remove the top and get this thing out. Last thing before the strut comes out, remove the top nut, and you also need to hold the bottom because it'll spin, or hold the shaft somewhere. I don't recommend that you, sometimes people will like clamp vice grips to the shaft of the strut. I don't recommend that you do that if you're going to reuse them. If you aren't going to reuse them and they're old and they're trashed and they're like factory and you want to swap over to a coilover setup, you can. But if you're ever going to reuse these, which I am, I don't recommend that you do it, because you don't want to damage something that you need later on. So I'm just going to go ahead and nicely take this thing out, get it boxed up and ready to go over to Bilstein for a rebuild. Alrighty, so I'm almost done removing this top nut. I should just be able to hand loosen now. I'm able to pull the rest of this shock out, just kind of wiggle it and loosen it, and it'll fall out easily. So other than that, this should be able to come out fairly easy. And then it's the same thing for the other side, and then the back's a little bit different, and I'll get to that over there. So the first thing to go onto this strut set is your bearing. This is what rotates whenever you turn your steering, and the whole spindle rotates. This shock also rotates, and it rotates on this, which is seated on the mount. But you have this upper strut nut, is what they call it actually. So the upper strut nut just goes down, and you would torque this down to its specified torque spec if you don't want it to go anywhere. So with assembling the strut, it's just the strut bearing on the underneath this strut mount. There's a strut bearing, then your strut mount, and then your upper strut nut goes down, and you just tighten that down till the bottom's out, and that should be about the assembly for this. Don't forget, you also have to insert this in the top. This is to hold the boot in. Another thing to note, whenever you're doing this work, no seize is really useful. If you just coat where it slides into the spindle, it helps pulling it out. And since these aren't going to be in here for a long period of time, and I'm going to have to open this back up to put in the rebuilt H&Rs, I'm actually going to put never seize in here. Alrighty, so I've got everything back into place. I have my lower strut bolt and nut tightened down, torque spec, and the same thing with the top nut. Now the good thing is everything on here is about 44 foot-pounds or 60 Newton meters. So the top nut, which you have to replace, this is a lock nut, that's 44. This is 44 with a 90-degree turn, nothing less than the 90 degree, and about between 90 degrees and 120 degrees. So basically if you're going down, it's just up to the side or a little bit past. That's to stretch it and lock it into place. And then the upper strut nut that is actually below this, that holds the boot and the bearing down, kind of holds that subsection together, and this holds it into the car. That is also 44 Newton meters or 44 foot-pounds. But the good thing is with that one, I just tightened it down to it bottomed out, or it hit where as far as it could go, so I was lucky with that. But that should about seal up for the coilover on this side. Then I have to do the other one on the other side, and then get to the back.
But we probably ought to be having fewer social gatherings between people.
Alrighty, now that we've finished the front suspension, I'm going to come back over here to the rear suspension. And I recommend also that whenever you're doing this for the rear suspension, it's important to get a jack, something else to lift up the back of the rear suspension. It makes taking some of these bolts out a lot easier, and it's actually necessary to tighten it down, but I'll show you that later. For now, I'm going to take out the 2 bolts on top and the 1 bolt down here, holding on the bottom of the shock. And then once that's free, you can lower down this portion of the rear suspension and be able to pull the spring out. So now we're good to move over to the other side and do this again. Good Lord, man. Oh my gosh. There you go. You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Glad to help.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you. Alrighty, everything's locked up on the rear here. You are supposed to have a dust boot here to keep this shaft safe, and also a bump stop right there, but I don't have that. But everything's tightened up and torqued down, and we should be good to go. Alrighty, I got it on coilovers. Everything's all tightened down. I just took it for a little test drive. The alignment is way off. When you have the coilovers out and they're not assembled yet, and you don't have the top strut nut tightened down, I do recommend that you set and match your perch height. You should set your perches because, especially with it all loaded down, it can be a little bit hard to turn, and that's especially the case for the rear. Now, it's easier to put in the rear spring whenever you have them set all the way down. It makes it easier for them to set in there, and I prefer to set in and then tip it into the top mount. One side was almost good on height, and the other side was all the way down. So it took me like 15 minutes. I literally brought some pillows out to lay on, to put on my head, so I could just lay there and tighten it. And it was so obnoxious. But I ended up getting so tired of doing that because it was at the point where the spring was putting so much tension on it. It was really hard to turn it. I actually took off the shock mount bolt and lowered the whole rear suspension again, just to make it easier to tighten the spring up. If you enjoyed any of the videos, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. If you have anything, if I messed up on anything, misspoke about anything, send me a comment. But to my knowledge, this is basically the way she goes. Thank you all for watching.